nobody stopped. That's what people don't tell you about rock bottom. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It's just Tuesday night on a corner no one cares about, and you're standing there hoping someone slows down long enough to see what you made. I was 31 years old. I had $42 to my name, and I was selling candles I poured myself in a studio apartment that smelled like lavender and mildew. 7 years later, I own a 14-room Victorian mansion on Ridgecrest Drive, and I still don't fully understand how. But someone does, and that someone has been very careful for a very long time to make sure I never find out. I set up every Friday, corner of Halstead and Monroe, right outside the old parking garage that always smelled like motor oil and regret. Most people walked past me like I was a shadow, which, honestly, I was, invisible to everyone who was somewhere and heading somewhere better. But not Edgar. He appeared the third Friday I was out there. Slow walk, tan coat. He studied every candle like he was at an art gallery. Then he picked up the one I almost didn't bring, a plain white pillar in a mason jar, unscented, no label. He said, "How much?" I said, $8. He gave me $20 and told me to keep it. He came back every single week for 3 years. The first strange thing happened on a night in November, cold enough that I could see my breath. Edgar arrived. Same time, same coat. But that night, instead of reaching for a candle, he reached into his breast pocket. He handed me a business card. No logo, no company, just a name, Harlan Voss, and a phone number with a Chicago area code. "Call him," Edgar said. "Tell him you make things with your hands and you understand patience." I stared at the card, then at him. "Who is this?" I asked. Edgar just said, "Someone who notices what other people don't." He picked up his candle, handed me his $20, and left. I didn't call the number that night, or the next week, but I kept the card. I don't know why. Something about the way he said it, the certainty in it, made me feel like throwing it away would be a mistake. Raymond found the card. Of course he did. He had a way of finding anything I tried to keep to myself, like he was always searching, always suspicious that I was building something without his permission. "Who's Harlan Voss?" he asked, voice flat, that flat voice that meant he'd already decided what the answer was. "A referral," I said, "from one of my customers." He laughed, the kind of laugh that's designed to make you feel small. "Your customers? Diana, you sell candles on a sidewalk, in the cold, for $8. I didn't say anything. He tossed the card back on the table. "Stop embarrassing yourself," he said. I picked up the card, put it in my coat pocket. And 3 days later, I made the call. Harlan Voss answered on the second ring. His voice was low, unhurried, like he'd been waiting. He asked me to describe how I made the candles, not what I used, how I approached it, what I thought about while I poured, whether I made them the same every time or whether each one was different. I told him the truth. Every one was different. I made each candle like it was going to be the last thing someone held before they went to sleep. There was a long silence. Then he said, "I run a private investment group. We fund people who make things that matter and understand discipline. You've been recommended to me by someone whose instincts I've trusted for 40 years. "Edgar," I said. He didn't confirm it. He just said, "I'd like to meet." I stood at that window for a long time after the call ended, watching the city wake up, wondering if this was the kind of moment you look back on or the kind you regret. The journalist came 7 years later. By then, I was already in the mansion. My company, Coal Light Interiors, was doing 8 figures a year. Started with candles, expanded to artisan home goods, then licensing, then property. Priya Nair showed up with a recorder, a smile, and questions that were carefully designed to sound casual. What's the one decision that changed everything? A phone call, I said. To who? I smiled. An old friend. She wrote something down, then looked up. Are you aware that the company you first partnered with, Harlan Voss's fund, dissolved 2 years after your deal? That several of its other investments failed completely? I had not been aware of that. I kept my face very still. My investment performed, I said. That's all I can speak to. She nodded, but she didn't write anything down, and that worried me more than anything she'd said. Raymond showed up 2 days after Priya's visit. I hadn't seen him in 4 years. He looked smaller somehow, like time had taken something off him he couldn't get back. I just want to talk, he said. I let him in because turning him away at the door of a house like this felt like a cruelty I didn't need on my conscience. We sat in the front room. He looked around at everything, the ceilings, the floors, the art, and I watched him do the math in real time. Then he said, I deserve to know how you did it. Not hello, not I'm sorry, just I deserve to know. You left, I said. You left and took $1,100 out of my savings account on the way out. What you deserve is a very different conversation. He flinched. Good. But then he said something that stopped me cold. The journalist who contacted you, Priya Nair, I'm the one who tipped her off. I wanted the story to come out. All of it. Because whatever you're hiding, Diana, I want you to finally have to explain it.
I called Edgar. I hadn't called him in over a year. He'd moved to a care facility in Evanston. His memory was going, his daughter had said. But he answered. Diana, he said, like he'd been expecting it. I told him what Priya had found, that the fund dissolved, that other investments tanked, that someone, Raymond, was feeding a journalist a story designed to make my success look criminal. Edgar was quiet for a long time. Then he said, the fund was never the point. Harlan used it to get you started. Once you were running, it didn't matter. Edgar, my voice was very even. Why did you send me to him? A longer silence. Because I watched you every Friday for 8 months before I ever bought a candle. And I needed to be sure. Sure of what? He said that you were the kind of person it was safe to help. The rain picked up. I looked at the candle on the table. Plain white, mason jar.
I called Priya, told her to come back. She arrived in an hour. I didn't offer tea this time. I stood at the window and I told her everything. The corner, Edgar, the card, Harlan, the call. I told her about Raymond, about the money he stole, about the years before anyone believed I was building something real. When I finished, she sat very still. Why are you telling me all this? She asked. Because, I said, whatever Raymond told you, the real story isn't dirty. It's not a scandal. It's just a woman who showed up every Friday in the cold and didn't stop. And Edgar? An old man who noticed. I turned to face her. That's the whole story. A woman who made things and a man who paid attention. Priya looked at her recorder, then at me. She clicked it off. I'm not writing the story Raymond wanted, she said. What are you writing? She picked up her bag. The real one.
I drove out to Evanston the following Sunday. Edgar was in the common room, sunlight on the table. He looked older than his voice had sounded on the phone, but his eyes were still clear. I brought him a candle. white pillar, mason jar. He smiled when he saw it. We sat together for almost 2 hours. He talked about his late wife, about a business he'd built and lost in his 50s, about what he called the discipline of noticing, the practice of actually looking at people instead of through them. Most people who needed help, he said, I could see it immediately. But you were different. You didn't want help. You wanted a chance. There's a meaningful difference. I asked him why he'd kept it secret all these years. He looked out the window. Because if you'd known, he said, you might have felt like you owed it to someone else instead of to yourself. I didn't say anything for a long time. Outside, the afternoon was gold and still. I lit the candle between us.
Priya's article came out 6 weeks later. It ran nationally. The headline was, "She sold candles in the rain. Now she owns the block. Here's what no one told you." It talked about grit, about invisibility, about what it means to build something when no one's watching. It didn't mention Edgar by name, at his request. Priya honored that. Raymond called after it published. I didn't answer. But I'll tell you what no one knows. Not Priya, not Raymond, not anyone who read that story. Edgar Mills passed away 11 days after I visited him. Quietly, in his sleep, his daughter told me. On his bedside table, a mason jar candle, white pillar, still burning. His daughter said she had no idea where it came from. It was already lit when the nurses came in that morning. I know where it came from. I just can't explain it. And some things, I've decided, aren't meant to be explained. They're just meant to keep burning.